Preface. There is a silence between every word we speak, a quiet space that holds more truth than our voices can ever confess. In that silence lives loneliness. It is not only the absence of people, but the absence of understanding, the ache of being unseen even when surrounded by 1,000 faces. This book was not written to escape loneliness, but to walk with it, to let it speak. For many years, I believed loneliness was an enemy to defeat, a darkness to hide from. But over time, I began to see that it was not the darkness itself that hurt me, but my fear of it. When I learned to sit with my solitude, to look at it without resistance, it transformed. It became a teacher. We live in an age of connection, yet we drift further apart. We scroll endlessly through images of happiness, searching for fragments of meaning in a world that feels increasingly hollow. Loneliness, once whispered about in private, has become a shared condition of the modern soul. But here's the paradox. Within loneliness lies the seed of our deepest connection, to others, to the world, and to ourselves. For only when we have been truly alone do we begin to understand what it means to belong. This book is not a manual. It is a mirror, one that reflects both the ache and the beauty of solitude. It asks questions more than it provides answers, because loneliness itself is a question. What does it mean to exist, to love, to be human in a world that forgets how to be silent? If you have ever felt unseen, unheard, or misunderstood, this book is for you. You are not alone in your loneliness. Introduction. The echo of the self. Loneliness is not a single feeling. It is a landscape, wide, shifting, and deeply human. It arrives quietly, like a shadow that lengthens with the evening light. You do not notice it at first. It sits beside you as you scroll through your phone, or as you walk home through a crowd. And suddenly, you feel the weight, the invisible distance between your heart and the rest of the world. Yet loneliness is not just about being without people. It is about being without meaning. You can be surrounded by friends and still feel the vast emptiness of disconnection. You can lie next to someone you love and feel as though your soul has wandered far away. Philosophers have spoken of loneliness in many tones. Nietzsche saw it as the price of truth, the consequence of rising above the herd. Kierkegaard called it the condition of faith, the moment when the individual must stand before God and self. And yet, poets and mystics saw in it something sacred, the birth of the inner voice. In loneliness, we begin to see the layers of ourselves. There is the self we show to the world, carefully shaped, endlessly performing. And then there is the quiet self, the one that sits in the dark and listens. Between them lies a space, the echo of the soul. This book will wander through that echo. We will explore loneliness not as a curse, but as a passage. A passage toward awareness, authenticity, and spiritual depth. In this journey, we will ask, why do we fear being alone? What does loneliness reveal about who we are? Can solitude become a form of strength, even love? The chapters that follow will not chase answers, they will open windows. Each will explore a dimension of loneliness, its pain, its wisdom, its transformation, and invite you to see your solitude not as an emptiness to fill, but as a silence to honor. Loneliness is not the end of connection. It is the beginning of awakening. The mirror of silence. There comes a time when the noise of life grows too loud, and the only thing that can save you is silence. Silence, that strange companion most of us fear. We fill our days with sounds, screens, and words not because we love them, but because we dread what might emerge in their absence. For when the noise fades, what remains is us, unfiltered, uncertain, and undeniably real. Silence is a mirror, and it shows everything we try to hide. We say we crave peace, yet we run from it, because peace demands stillness, and in stillness, we meet the truth. The truth that we are temporary. The truth that our happiness cannot always be explained. The truth that we are, at times, unbearably alone. When Ilyas sat alone for the first time in many years, no phone, no music, no distractions, he heard his own breathing as if it belonged to someone else. The air in the room felt heavy, the seconds long. Every sound, a clock ticking, a distant car, the pulse in his ear, became a reminder of time passing. Of life passing. And in that moment, he realized something terrifying: he didn't really know himself. He had built his life on movement, conversations, plans, ambitions. But now, stripped of them, he was confronted by his own reflection in the quiet. A human being who had never truly paused long enough to listen. The silence asked him questions he had avoided all his life. Who are you when no one is watching? What remains of you when all the noise stops? Do you love yourself, or do you only love being distracted from yourself? Silence does not lie. It does not flatter. It simply reflects. Like a mirror, it shows you your wounds and your beauty, equally. Most people avoid it for that reason. We prefer to lose ourselves in the noise of the world rather than face the echo of our own being. But the irony is that without silence, we never truly meet life. We only meet its surface, a series of reactions, expectations, and repetitions. In silence, the surface falls away. The performance ends. You are not your job, your followers, your fears, or even your dreams. You are something deeper, an awareness that watches it all. And this is the beginning of awakening. The realization that your loneliness is not a flaw in your being, but a doorway into it. One evening, Ilyas walked outside as the sky folded into dusk. The world was quiet, not empty, but vast. He felt something unfamiliar, not joy, not sadness, but presence. The trees stood still. The wind carried the faint scent of rain. Everything around him existed effortlessly, without needing attention or validation. He thought, perhaps the universe is not lonely at all. Perhaps it is just silent. It was then he began to see, loneliness and silence are not the same, but they speak the same language. Silence is the voice of the universe. Loneliness is our resistance to hearing it. To listen, truly listen, to silence is to let the world speak back to you. And when you do, you discover that every leaf, every breath, every heartbeat is saying the same thing. You are not separate. You are part of everything. But that discovery comes only to those who dare to be alone. Philosophical reflection. Silence is not empty. It is full of truth. In philosophy, silence has always been sacred, the space where thought becomes insight. Socrates spoke of inner dialogue, Buddha of mindful stillness, Rumi of the quiet where the heart speaks to God. Every great awakening begins not with words, but with listening. The problem is that modern life has replaced silence with simulation. We are constantly connected, yet internally, more disconnected than ever. The mind becomes like a crowded room, full of voices, none of them our own. To reclaim silence is to reclaim identity. It is to say, I choose to hear myself again. That is where courage begins. Not in grand gestures, but in stillness, in facing the unspoken, the uncomfortable, the deeply human. As the chapter closes, Ilyas learns the first truth of loneliness. It is not a punishment, but an invitation. To meet silence. To see himself clearly, without noise, without masks, without fear. In the mirror of silence, he begins to understand that the only way to escape loneliness is to stop escaping it. Because in accepting it, he finally begins to listen. The weight of connection. We are born into a world that worships togetherness. From childhood, we are told that happiness comes from belonging to a family, a group, a cause, a person. We are taught to seek connection as if it were the ultimate cure for emptiness. But what if connection, when misunderstood, becomes another form of loneliness? Isaac sat in a cafe surrounded by laughter, the hum of conversation, and the rhythmic clinking of cups. Yet inside him, there was a silence so deep it felt like the world had forgotten him. The sound around him only made the absence within louder. He watched faces glow under the soft light, friends talking, lovers smiling, and wondered how many of them felt as he did. Surrounded, but unseen. There is a loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from being misunderstood among people. It is the loneliness of speaking a truth no one hears, of smiling when your soul is tired, of nodding in conversations that leave you emptier. In that moment, Isaac realized something painful. We often connect through masks, not through hearts. We perform happiness to be accepted, we hide pain to avoid judgment, and in doing so, we create a world of people who are all pretending not to be lonely. Connection becomes heavy when it's forced. It becomes a burden when it demands you to shrink yourself to fit someone else's comfort. True connection, the kind that nourishes, requires vulnerability. It requires the courage to say, "This is who I am." Not perfect, not constant, but real. But we live in a time where people fear sincerity. We share our smiles online and hide our tears offline. We post, "I'm fine," and mean, "I'm falling apart." We mistake attention for affection, replies for presence, and validation for love. The truth is, you can be surrounded by 1,000 people and still starve for connection. Because connection is not about proximity, but depth. That evening, Isaac walked home thinking of all the times he had felt invisible in crowded rooms. He began to understand that the greatest tragedy of modern existence is not solitude, but superficiality. We touch everything but feel nothing. We communicate constantly but say nothing. We are always reachable, yet rarely reached. It's not that humans don't want to connect, they simply forgot how. To connect deeply, you must first learn to listen, not to reply, but to understand. And that kind of listening can only be born in silence, the silence within, the one Ilas had begun to meet in Chapter 1. Philosophical reflection. The philosopher Martin Buber once wrote about two kinds of relationships, I-it and I-thou. In the first, we treat others as objects, things to use, understand, or categorize. In the second, we meet them as beings, mirrors of the divine, reflections of our own mystery. Most of our modern relationships are I-it. We treat each other as roles, profiles, or opinions. But real connection, the sacred kind, happens only when two souls meet without armor. It is rare, it is fragile, it cannot be rushed or forced. And perhaps that's why loneliness exists, to remind us of the sacredness of what is real. When Isaac returned home, he sat again in silence. But this time, it was different. He no longer feared the quiet. He began to feel the faint heartbeat of something beyond himself, a presence that connected everything. The people he saw, the world around him, the very air he breathed. He realized that loneliness was not the absence of connection, but the longing for authentic connection, with oneself, with others, with life itself. And in that longing, he began to see a paradox. The only way to truly connect with others is to first be comfortable standing alone. He wrote in his journal that night, "Perhaps loneliness is not a curse, but a teacher reminding me that love is sacred only when it's real. That to find a true friend, a true love, or a true self, I must stop chasing noise and begin listening to what my heart is quietly asking." The shadow within. Every soul has a place it fears to visit, a quiet corner of the heart where old pain still breathes. For Isaac, that place had no name. It was made of echoes, voices from his past, unspoken regrets, moments he wished he could rewrite. He often kept himself busy to avoid them, conversations, work, screens, noise. But when silence arrived, the shadows came alive. That night, as rain whispered against the window, he sat in his small room with nothing but the hum of the lamp. He felt a strange heaviness, not sadness, not despair, but a quiet confrontation with his own truth. He asked himself softly, "Why'd I fear being alone?" The answer came not in words, but in a wave of feeling, because when he was alone, he could no longer hide. He could not distract himself with other people's noise or opinions. He had to meet himself, unmasked, unfiltered. And that meeting was often uncomfortable. Loneliness often carries the voice of our forgotten self. It is not always asking for others, sometimes it's asking for our own attention. Philosophers have long spoken of this encounter. Carl Jung called it the meeting with the shadow, the moment we face the parts of us we deny, the emotions we repress, the truths we bury. We are taught to seek light, but not to understand darkness. We want joy without sorrow, confidence without doubt, love without vulnerability. But life is not made of one side of the coin. To be whole, one must meet both, the shadow and the sun. Isaac began writing again, not for others, but for himself. He wrote of anger he never expressed, of dreams he had buried under practicality, of love he never dared to confess. The more he wrote, the more his words turned into a mirror. He began to see that what he feared was not loneliness, but honesty. He had built walls of politeness, productivity, distraction, to avoid the raw truth that he did not fully know himself. In his journal he wrote, "I wear so many versions of myself, one for the world, one for my family, one for my fears. But somewhere beneath them all, there's a voice I never learned to trust, my own." The shadow is not evil. It is simply everything we refuse to accept, our pain, envy, mistakes, fragility. When ignored, it becomes heavy. When faced, it becomes wisdom. Loneliness, then, is often the distance between who we are and who we pretend to be. The more masks we wear, the deeper that distance grows. And so, to heal loneliness, one must dare to take off the masks, slowly, compassionately, courageously. One evening, Isaac remembered a time in his youth when he had failed someone he loved. He had carried that guilt for years, hidden under layers of silence. He had never forgiven himself, not truly. He realized that his loneliness was, in part, self-punishment. We speak often about forgiving others, but the hardest forgiveness is of oneself. He whispered into the quiet, "I forgive you." And in that whisper, something shifted. The shadow did not disappear, but it softened. Philosophical reflection. Fear is not the enemy of courage, it is its birthplace. Without fear, there can be no growth, no meaning. The Stoics taught that suffering is not what destroys us, our resistance to it does. We fear pain, and in that fear, we multiply it. But when we turn toward it, gently, bravely, it begins to transform. To live fully, one must walk with the shadow, not against it. To know peace, one must stop fleeing from what is real, even the parts that ache. Isaac closed his journal, feeling lighter. He had not solved his loneliness, but he had befriended it. He understood now that loneliness could be a doorway, leading not to despair, but to deeper awareness. He sat by the window, the rain easing into silence. For the first time, he felt not separate from the darkness, but embraced by it. He realized, the light I've been searching for was never out there, it was hidden behind the fear I refused to face. The beauty of solitude. There came a morning when Isaac woke to stillness, not the heavy stillness of emptiness, but one that felt strangely alive. The room was quiet, but not silent. The wind brushed against the curtains, the city whispered faintly below, and the first light of dawn drew golden lines across the walls. He didn't rush to check his phone, didn't look for distraction. He simply sat and listened. For the first time in a long while, the quiet didn't scare him. It welcomed him, like an old friend he had forgotten to visit. Solitude is not absence, it is presence, a deep one. When you sit alone long enough, you begin to notice things that rush cannot show you. The rhythm of your breath, the soft music of your thoughts, the small pulse of life within everything. It is here, in this tender space, that you begin to hear your own voice again, not the one shaped by others' expectations, but the quiet, original sound of your being. The philosophers knew this well. Rumi wrote, "The quieter you become, the more you are able to hear." And Thoreau said, "I never found the companion that was so companionable as solitude." Isaac began to walk in the park every morning. He didn't take music or his phone. He walked slowly, letting his thoughts wander like birds returning home. At first, the silence felt strange, then, it became sacred. He started noticing how the world was constantly speaking to him, the way sunlight filtered through the trees, the way wind carried secrets between leaves, the way strangers smiled without needing to know his story. It was as if life was whispering, "You were never truly alone." As days passed, Isaac's relationship with himself softened. He no longer feared the mirror. He began to see not someone broken, but someone becoming. In solitude, he discovered self-compassion, that gentle forgiveness that blooms when you stop trying to be perfect and simply allow yourself to be human. He realized that solitude is not punishment, it's preparation. It is the ground where the soul roots itself before blooming again into the world. Philosophical reflection. Loneliness is a cry, solitude is an answer. Loneliness says, "I need someone." Solitude says, "I am someone." To embrace solitude is to step beyond the constant hunger for validation and rediscover the peace of existence itself. It is not about rejecting people, but about remembering that your worth does not depend on their gaze. When you can sit alone and feel whole, you have reached a kind of freedom that cannot be taken away. Isaac began writing again, not about pain this time, but about peace. He wrote of the sky, of gratitude, of the invisible harmony that connects all things. His words became lighter, like lanterns floating on water. He wrote, "In solitude, I have met my truest companion, silence. It listens when no one else does. It holds space for my fears, and teaches me that peace is not found in noise, but in the gentle acceptance of being." One evening, while sitting beneath an old tree, he felt something shift inside, a quiet joy, soft but unmistakable. He wasn't waiting for life to begin anymore. He was in it. He realized that solitude had turned into a sacred teacher. It taught him to breathe without rushing, to love without clinging, to exist without needing a reason. He whispered, "Perhaps this is what freedom feels like, not the absence of people, but the presence of peace." Philosophical reflection 2. To live without solitude is to live at the surface. You hear the world but never your soul. You move constantly but never arrive. Solitude, on the other hand, is a descent, not into emptiness, but into essence. It's where you meet the eternal part of yourself, the part untouched by time, loss, or praise. When you touch that part, you understand that peace isn't something you chase, it's something you uncover, like light beneath layers of noise. The sun was setting when Isaac stood up. He looked at the horizon, the fading gold melting into deep blue, and smiled. He wasn't looking for answers anymore. He was learning to live the questions. For the first time, he didn't need the world to fill him. He was full of silence, of gratitude, of something vast and unnamed. He closed his eyes and said softly, "I have learned to be alone, and in that, I have learned to be whole." The return to connection. The seasons had changed quietly. The once bare trees Ilas walked beneath were now full and green, their leaves trembling gently in the afternoon wind. It had been months since he'd last written in his journal, not because he had stopped thinking, but because he had started living again. He sat at his usual bench in the park, feeling the pulse of the city around him, children laughing, birds darting through branches, someone playing soft guitar in the distance. The noise no longer felt intrusive. It felt like a heartbeat, one that matched his own. He realized something simple and profound: he had stopped being a spectator of life. He was part of it again. The gentle return. After months of solitude, the first step back into the world was quiet, a simple hello to the grocer, a nod to the neighbor he once ignored, a short visit to a cafe where laughter rose like sunlight through glass. He watched people differently now, not as strangers, but as stories moving beside him. Every face carried its own universe, every voice its own melody of fear and hope. For the first time, he understood, everyone carries their own silence. He no longer felt separate because he knew, even in their joy, people carried loneliness too. Connection wasn't about eliminating that loneliness, it was about recognizing it in each other and saying softly, I see you. The philosophy of connection. Connection, he wrote one night, is not the merging of two people, it is the meeting of two complete souls who choose to share their journey for a while. He used to think love meant losing yourself in another. Now, he understood that real love begins when you've already found yourself. The philosopher Martin Buber once said, all real living is meeting. Isaac felt that truth like a quiet thunder in his chest. You cannot meet someone fully unless you have first met yourself in solitude. You cannot listen deeply unless you have first learned silence. You cannot truly love unless you have already embraced your own shadows. Connection, then, was not escape, it was expansion. 3. The art of presence. He started visiting an old library near the coast. There, he would sit between shelves of forgotten books and listen to the slow rhythm of pages turning. Sometimes, he spoke with the librarian, a gentle woman with silver hair who had eyes full of stories. They would talk about philosophy, about Rumi, about how people chase happiness but forget peace. One day, she asked, do you ever get lonely? He smiled and said, sometimes. But I've learned that loneliness doesn't mean I'm unloved, it means I'm alive. She nodded. Yes, she said, loneliness is the soul's way of asking for deeper company, not with others, but with truth. The balance between silence and sound. Isaac returned to his family. At first, they didn't understand the quiet calm he carried. They asked why he spoke slower, why he smiled more but said less. He only said, I've learned that peace doesn't shout. He began to see how easily people fill silence with noise, as if afraid to face themselves. Yet he no longer needed to speak to be understood. His calm became his language. He once feared loneliness, now he carried solitude as strength. He once sought validation, now he found joy in simply being present. Thanks guys, for your attention, and I'm going to see you soon, and have a nice day.